All right, hello everyone out there. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas. I do educational videos on many different subjects, mostly obscure and esoteric subjects. And this is no exception. We're looking at, this is our 47th video on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And Larson, this is a theory of everything that he developed from between 1930 and the day he died in 1990. We are currently looking at his, I think this is the 25th video that we've done on his book called Beyond Space and Time. This is his final book. But up until that point, he had done mostly books on the hard sciences, physics and chemistry and astronomy. And the basic gist of it is that it took Larson about 20 or 25 years to arrive at his two fundamental postulates for the reciprocal system. And then from there, he built out a whole theoretical universe of how everything works in the universe. And then he compared it to the kind of the actual universe that the scientists had developed through observation and measurement and experimentation and hypothesizing. It's different than, he has a book that's called Beyond Newton. So he kind of bypasses Einstein and he builds on what Newton had come up with back in the 17th century. And again, he kind of is an alternative to Einstein because, you know, Einstein is he's basically saying that, okay, Newton is correct mostly, but in certain areas, he's not, in the relativistic areas, he's not correct, the very fast, the very small, and so on. He's not getting those right. And so I've got all these relativistic equations that I stole from other people that I'm going to plug into my relativistic system. Larson kind of does the same, but I think more effectively. So where Newton and his predecessors, all the way back to the Greeks, are saying that the universe is made out of matter, Einstein is saying the universe is made out of energy. And he gives us E equals mc squared. And energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. And so energy can be converted to matter and vice versa through the speed of light and squared. And Larson says, well, if energy can be converted to matter and vice versa, that means that neither one of them can be the most fundamental thing in the universe. And he says that the most fundamental thing is really the c squared part, the motion. And so his first and most important postulate is that the physical universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. The way I think of it is that the universe is not made out of matter, it's not made out of energy, it's made out of motion. Motion is the relationship between space and time. Space and time are both the same, except that they are reciprocals of each other. And so when you're talking about a relationship, you're basically talking about a fraction, a ratio. And so any type of relationship or a fractional relationship between time and space is a motion. All kinds of scientific entities, units, are forms of motion. Speed, acceleration, pressure, mass, force, magnetic charge, electrical charge. They are all kinds of motion, and they all can be represented specifically and exclusively in space-time relationships or time-space relationships. And time and space both are the same in that they both progress Time is always getting later and later and later. Space is always getting further and further and further apart, evidenced by the recession of the distant galaxies. And then they both have 3 dimensions. I would say they both have 3 or 4 dimensions. You can think of the 3 or 4 dimensions as a cube. So the cube, the parallel faces of the cube represent the x, y, z coordinates of 3 dimensions. They are orthogonal. They're at right angles to each other. And so that's where the cube comes from. But if you draw a diagonal on each face of the cube, like draw an X on each face of the cube, those lines of the X, that forms a star tetrahedron. And the star tetrahedron gives you the 4 dimensions of the universe. So really, you could even say 7 dimensions. Okay, and so that's the first postulate. The second postulate is not as important. It's more axiomatic. The physical universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute and its geometry is Euclidean. Okay, then he eventually, to get to the metaphysical stuff, he develops 4 other metaphysical postulates that I won't get into quite yet, but the main part with the metaphysics is that he builds, this is where he's talking about philosophy, religion, and psychology in particular. And where Einstein is saying that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, Larson says that the speed of light is the midpoint or the neutral point of the universe. And half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light. He calls that the cosmic sector, because the slower than speed of light that we're familiar with, the material sector. This is the realm of atoms and molecules. He calls this sector 1. He calls this sector 2. Sector 1 aggregates, grows by aggregation, just by glomming on to each other, up until the point where, you have billions of atoms making up one molecule. The most complex atom, or the most complex molecule, DNA. And once you have this DNA complex molecule, it's complex enough to actually accommodate a unit or an entity from the cosmic sector. And the cosmic sector then comes over, or sector 2, comes over and takes control over the sector 1 component, the material component. So that's life. A life unit is a material unit under the control, overall control of a cosmic unit. The analogy he uses is a thermostat. The thermostat is just a small part of the room, but it controls the environment of the room. And it's the same way with the life, the sector 2 unit controlling the sector 1. But then once you have life also becomes more and more complex until you get what he calls the ethical human being, the ethical intelligent human being. And the intelligent human being, not ethical, the intelligent human being, and then the intelligent human being becomes eligible to be controlled overall by the sector 3 component. The sector 3 component is the component that is independent of space and time. So this is really where because space and time both have a minimum, a discrete or quanta of space and a quanta of time, where the quantum is the minimum, the one unit, and 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light, 1 over 1. And 1 over 1 is 1. And so space and time cancel out, and you just have 1. And that is really like the sector 3. And the sector 3 can take control over this intelligent humanoid and turn it into an ethical being. An ethical being, ethics being the motivation of sector 3, whereas Sector 2 is motivated by survival. It's a life unit. So that puts the human kind of in the crosshairs between these two different forces, life, survival, and then ethical behavior. At times they dovetail, but at times they work in opposite purposes, and the human has to decide, which one. And that's kind of, whatever, the human condition. And so now he goes into a couple chapters where he's discussing communications from Sector 3. And he identifies those as being ESP, intuition, scientific insight, and religious revelation. And so now he's talking about information. And so he says, every message, this is chapter 11, every message which we receive from physical sources is subject to error, regardless of whether it is a direct transmission from an original source or a communication from another individual. Every item of information that is received through these physical channels must therefore be verified in some manner before we are justified in accepting it as an established fact. In the ordinary course of everyday life, the uncertainties in most sense data are minor and of little consequence. Verification of these data is therefore perfunctory and mainly carried out unconsciously. But if we are viewing something in the distance or in dim light, or if we hear an indistinct sound or detect a faint odor, we make a conscious effort to determine the validity of the message that arrives by way of our senses. Was this actually what we saw, heard, or smelled? We ask our reasoning process. Then, after checking the incoming information against whatever pertinent knowledge we may possess, we eventually arrive at some conclusions as to the probability that this information is correct. If action is called for, we act accordingly. Exactly the same considerations apply to intuitive information. That's information from Sector 3. The true status of the information received through the various forms of intuition discussed in the 3 preceding chapters, revelation, ESP, scientific insight, and intuition in general, can be understood only if it is recognized that intuition is not a source of information, it is a means of transmission. It's a key point. Not a source. Intuition is not a source of information, but it is a means of transmission. It cannot be expected that the reception of the transmitted information by the human recipients will always be accurate. On the contrary, there are good reasons to believe that human ability to receive non-physical message accurately is even more limited than the capability of accurate reception of physical messages. Like physical information, therefore, non-physical intuitive information must be verified before it can be accepted as valid. Consideration of the foregoing point should make it clear that the metaphysical or non-physical communication system is a parallel of the physical communication. Now remember, when Larson is saying physical, he's referring to both Sector 1 and Sector 2. Sector 1 is material and physical. Sector 2 is not material, it's cosmic, but it is still physical. Whereas Sector 3 is not physical, non-physical. Each has its own source of information, and each has its own method of transmission, and each has its own kind of receiving equipment for converting the transmitted messages into mental processes. Okay, now he sets up a little chart here. Source, the character of the information, source, transmission, and reception. The source for the physical experience. For the metaphysical, Sector 3. The transmission for the physical processes. for the metaphysical intuitive processes, and the reception for the physical to mental, and the metaphysical to mental. The reliability of the information depends in both cases on the extent to which it can be verified. Physical information is customarily verified by showing that it is consistent with the other relevant information derived from experience. Specialists in this field distinguish between the specific comparisons of the individual items with the corresponding data from observation, which they call the test of correspondence, and examination of the extent of agreement between these individual items and all other relevant items of information are accepted as valid, which they call the test of coherence. The reciprocal system of physical theory is necessarily coherent inasmuch as it is derived in its entirety from a single set of basic premises. It has also passed the test of correspondence in thousands of separate correlations. The validity of this system is therefore physically certain. The metaphysical theory derived in this volume by extension of the verified physical findings is likewise coherent, as it too is derived entirely from a single set of postulates. Certain consequences of these postulates, particularly those concerned with the reality of metaphysical existence, have been checked against observation and have passed the test of correspondence. For example, the basic assertion that there is a metaphysical aspect of human existence was verified by showing that there are certain features of human behavior, such as taking actions that are contrary to the principles that govern purely biological organisms or survival, that are beyond the capacity of any entities that are wholly physical, and other features such as the ability to do something totally new, that are beyond the capacity of mechanisms in general. This and the other theoretically derived conclusions that have been verified by the correspondence test are physically certain and have the full status of scientific knowledge. So that's his demonstration of proof of the reciprocal system, both of physical theory and metaphysical theory. As indicated in Chapter 10, there are other metaphysical areas, such as ethics, which do not have the kind of an impact on the physical world that makes direct correspondence tests feasible, as matters now stand. Perhaps some tests of this nature can be devised later, after additional investigations have developed more information. But for the present, we will have to rely on the test of coherence, supplemented by a modified form of the correspondence test, in which we apply a number of different criteria, such as those described in the earlier discussion, each of which increases or decreases the probability that the item under consideration is correct. By summing up the position and negative contributions of this kind, we arrive at a net evaluation of the probability that this is a valid addition to knowledge. Okay, so he continues to go on, and then he gets into talking about some of his astronomical, just as evidence or as an example. And there is no significant difference between the physical and the non-physical items of information so far as certainty is concerned. Ordinarily, the physical information can be more easily checked against the observed facts, but the ultimate result depends on what is actually verified in each case. Where the overall possibility of error has been reduced to a negligible level, physical certainty has been established, irrespective of the nature of the criteria that were employed. Where something less than certainty is reached, a given probability derived non-physically is fully equivalent to the same probability derived physically. Thus, there is no legitimate reason why verified non-physical information should be regarded as in any way inferior to verified physical information, or verified information from intuitive sources as any less reliable than verified information from experience. Recognition of the authenticity of properly verified intuitive information is essential before full advantage can be taken of the new knowledge as to the reality of existence independent of space and time, in straightening out the present confused and illogical situation in the non-physical fields of human activity. So he's really saying he's making an attempt to turn this soft, squishy science of metaphysics, philosophy, psychology, into a hard science. So, as matters now stand, those who recognize the existence of such things as moral standards, ESP, religious revelation, non-evolutionary goals, and the like are compelled to make their stand on unsupported assertions, while those who are impressed with the lack of acceptable evidence find it necessary to deny the existence of such items. Some of the most significant features of human life. The availability of a large supply of additional information of a reliable nature derived from intuitive sources now makes it possible to reconcile these conflicting viewpoints. In the pages that follow, we will examine some of the important non-physical aspects of life as they appear in the new light that is thrown upon them by the intuitive information. Okay, that is the end of chapter 11. And tomorrow we will begin chapter 12, which is called Miracles. So stay tuned. Come back tomorrow, and we're going to learn a little bit more about the reciprocal system of theory, and in particular, miracles. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.